All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going deep, really deep,
Oh,
into the world of supply chains.
ooh,
You've been doing some research on
I
this,
have, yes.
and I've got a ton of interesting material for us to dig into. We're going to be talking about everything from like the nuts and bolts of how things get moved around,
Hmm.
logistics and operations and stuff,
Right.
to the bigger picture of like global trade and
Yeah.
even how technology is like totally reshaping the whole thing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how all these pieces fit together.
Right. So to help us connect all the dots, so to speak, we have an expert here with us today.
Happy to be here.
So I think a good place to start might be with this excerpt from Advanced Logistics Management that you found.
Yeah.
It really highlights this like close connection between the operations side of things,
Yeah.
actually making this stuff, and the logistics, getting it to where it needs to go.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. We're so used to just ordering something online and it magically appearing at our doorstep a day or two later.
Right.
But there's a ton of work that goes on behind the scenes to make that happen. Like this source even mentions companies like what was it, Pos
In
Malaysia?
Friends Malaysia, yeah.
And GDEX and
Mhm.
how they're using all this like super advanced tech to optimize their delivery routes
Yeah.
and manage all those packages.
Huh. I never really thought about it that way.
It's crazy.
Like we expect things instantly now, like it's got to be there tomorrow or even today.
Exactly. And meeting those expectations is a huge challenge for supply chains.
So how do they even do it?
Well, it's all about efficiency, right? Like
Right.
squeezing every bit of wasted time and effort out of the system.
Yeah.
But then there's also the cost factor. Like, how do you keep costs down
Yeah.
while still delivering,
Quickly.
super fast?
Yeah.
Exactly. And you got to think about all the resources that go into it, like the fuel, the trucks, the people.
Yeah, it's more than just clicking buy now.
Oh, yeah, way more.
Speaking of resources, I noticed the source also mentioned Port Klang,
Ah, Port Klang, yeah.
which, if I'm not mistaken, is Malaysia's largest port.
It is the biggest and busiest.
And what makes it so important in all of this?
Well, think about it. It's like the gateway for Malaysia to the rest of the world. Goods from all over come in and Malaysian products go out.
Right.
It's crucial for their economy, their trade, any problems there, any disruptions, and it can have ripple effects, like everywhere.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. Prices go up, products become scarce, it's a mess.
Wow. So even something like a delay at the port can have huge consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The source also touched on Malaysia's palm oil industry, which I know is a huge export for them.
Huge, yeah.
How does that tie into all this, like with Port Klang and everything?
Well, think of all those palm oil plantations producing all that oil, and
Yeah.
then it's got to get processed, packaged, and shipped out, a lot of it through Port Klang.
To like all over the world, right?
Exactly. It ends up in food, cosmetics, all sorts of stuff.
That's wild. Like I use palm oil every day probably,
Probably. Most people do.
and I never even think about where it comes from
That's the thing about supply chains. They're kind of invisible.
until something goes wrong.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got these massive ports and all these resources being moved around, and then there's this whole other side of it, like the tech side.
Yeah, the tech.
I mean, the source mentioned Penang's electronics sector, calling it the Silicon Valley of the East.
Yeah, Silicon Valley of the East, it's pretty impressive what they've built there.
What makes it so special?
Well, for one, it's a major hub for semiconductor chip manufacturing.
Those tiny little things that are in everything.
Yeah, those tiny little things.
So are you telling me, like, my phone, the one I'm using right now,
Oh,
probably has parts that came from Malaysia?
it's highly likely. Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's global collaboration in action.
It really is.
Like raw materials from one place, components from another, all coming together to make this thing.
Huh. Globalization. And speaking of globalization, the source also mentioned these trade agreements, like RCEP.
Oh, yeah, RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
Right. That's the one. What's the deal with those?
Well, they're basically designed to, like, smooth out the wrinkles in global trade.
Wrinkles, huh?
Make it easier for countries to trade with each other by reducing tariffs, cutting red tape, that kind of stuff.
So it's good for businesses.
In theory.
Yeah.
In theory.
Well, there are always debates about the winners and losers in these big trade deals.
Blah.
But the goal is to make things more efficient, boost economies, all that.
Gotcha. It's complicated.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting to think about how these agreements actually shape the way supply chains operate.
They really do.
Okay, so we've talked about, like, the physical movement of goods, these massive ships and ports, and these trade agreements that are kind of the rules of the game.
Mhm.
But what about the technology side of it?
Ah, the tech, that's where things get really futuristic. Because the source was talking about things like blockchain and AI.
Oh yeah, those are game changers.
So how are these technologies actually being used in supply chains?
Well, take blockchain, for example.
Oh,
It can help to create much more transparent supply chains.
transparent hell.
Like imagine being able to track your coffee beans
Okay.
from the farm where they were grown all the way to your cup.
Wow, really?
Yeah, you could see every step of the journey.
So you could be sure that the coffee you're drinking is ethically sourced.
Exactly, and that it meets certain quality standards.
That's incredible. And what about AI? What's its role?
AI is being used to optimize pretty much every aspect of logistics. Like they have these systems that can analyze tons of data to predict demand, like how much a product people are going to want, and then they can adjust inventory levels accordingly.
So less waste, right?
Exactly. Less waste, more efficiency.
And what about like delivery routes and stuff?
AI can optimize those too, like in real time based on traffic, weather, all sorts of factors.
So it's like having a super smart GPS for every truck.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's amazing how these technologies are making supply chains so much more responsive and efficient.
It's mind-blowing.
And the source made a really good point. Like, in today's world, with all its uncertainty, adaptable and efficient supply chains are more important than ever.
Absolutely. Think about what happened with the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Everything got thrown out of whack.
Shortages everywhere.
Yeah, it showed just how vulnerable these systems can be.
But also how crucial they are.
For sure, we rely on them for everything.
So it seems like supply chains are way more than just trucks and warehouses. They're this complex, interconnected system that affects all of us.
It's true.
They're global, they're high-tech, and they're constantly evolving.
And that evolution is something to think about.
What do you mean?
Well, we're seeing growing concerns about things like sustainability, ethical sourcing, climate change, all that. So, how will supply chains adapt to those concerns? Will consumers demand even more transparency, more accountability from the companies they buy from?
Those are good questions.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, it's something to think about for sure. Well, I think we did a pretty good job of diving deep into the world of supply chains.
We covered a lot of ground.
Thanks to our expert here.
My pleasure.
You've given us a lot to think about. And for our listeners, keep exploring. There's always more to discover. That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.